I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Caroline Foster, and at 71 years old, I never thought I'd be sitting here telling you about how my own family tried to steal everything I had worked for. But sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you should trust the least. My son-in-law Brian punched me in the face. My own daughter Lauren dragged me out by my hair, all because I said no to giving them $3 million. I sat on the curb, bleeding, shivering, and wondering when my child became someone I no longer recognized. But what they didn't know was that I had already prepared for this moment. And 1 hour later, everything began to fall apart for them. I moved in with my daughter, Lauren, the week after I turned 71, not because I couldn't live on my own, not because I needed help climbing stairs or remembering names, but because she said she missed me, said she wanted me closer, said her husband Brian even agreed. At the time, I thought it was love. I didn't realize it was strategy. Their house sat on a quiet street outside Des Moines with a wide porch and a white swing that never got used. Lauren had decorated the guest room in lilac and ivory, my favorite colors. There were new sheets on the bed, and a framed photo of us from her high school graduation sat on the nightstand. I remember standing there, suitcase still in hand, and thinking, maybe this will be good. Maybe this will heal the distance between us. It wasn't like I had nowhere else to go. I had a small apartment 2 towns over. I used to work part-time at the public library, organizing the historical archives and leading genealogy workshops. That work meant something to me. So did the quiet of my own home, my little kitchen, my ceramic owl salt shakers. But Lauren said she missed dinners with me, said she wanted her kids to hear my stories. I believed her. The first week went well. She made me tea each night before bed. Brian asked about my old job. The grandkids sat at my feet while I told them how our ancestors came over from Wales. I felt almost foolish for having doubted her. Then gradually, small things changed. Lauren started bringing up bills more often. Her voice was light, but the words were weighted. She talked about refinancing, about college savings, about how tight things had gotten. Brian mentioned an opportunity through one of his clients, some real estate fund, high return, low risk. He said it casually over dinner one night while slicing roast chicken. I nodded politely, but something in my chest tightened. A few days later, Lauren came into my room holding a folder. Inside were bank forms, a notarization page, and a printout of my investment account. She sat down beside me on the bed. Her tone was careful. "We just need a short-term transfer. Mom," she said, tucking a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear. "We'd return it within 6 months. It would help secure our future and the kids." I stared at the papers, my heart suddenly pounding. "How did you get access to my account information?" She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "I've always known your passwords. I need to check in on you sometimes." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. Something had cracked open. I thought about my late husband, how we'd saved for years, bit by bit, never touching the principal. I thought about the time I loaned Lauren $2,000 to fix her transmission and how she never paid it back. I realized I had moved into a house where love came with conditions. By the end of that second week, I stopped leaving my bedroom door unlocked at night. Looking back now, I wonder if any of you have ever felt that shift, too. When a hug becomes a transaction, when kindness turns into currency. If you've ever trusted someone so much that you moved into their home only to feel the walls close in, then you know what I mean. And if you haven't yet, stay with me, because what happened next would split everything wide open. By the start of the 3rd week, things shifted from subtle to obvious. I noticed it first with the grocery receipts. I always offered to pay for what I used: milk, bread, my special chamomile tea. But one afternoon, Lauren left a receipt on the counter, circled items in red ink, and wrote a total beside it. Then she added a sticky note. "Your share. Thanks. No greeting, no smiley face, just a number." Later that evening, she handed me a printed breakdown of the monthly utilities highlighted, organized into columns. She pointed to my name at the bottom and said with a calm voice, "Fairness keeps things clear. That's how families stay strong." Brian didn't speak much that night, but he did nod in agreement while scrolling on his phone. I didn't argue. I walked upstairs with the paper in hand, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the math. The total wasn't outrageous, but the message was louder than the number. They didn't want a mother in their home. They wanted a tenant. A few days later, I found Brian in the kitchen flipping through a small black notebook. When I entered, he closed it too fast. He set it on the counter and smiled like nothing happened. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Caroline?" he said, his voice too cheerful. "I was thinking of grilling tonight." Later that night, when they were out, I checked the drawer where I kept my personal folder. It was slightly out of place. The tabs had been shifted. Some of the documents weren't where I last left them. I didn't need proof to know. I had seen enough over the years to trust my instincts. Something was unfolding behind my back. The next morning over breakfast, Lauren casually brought up estate planning. She tucked her feet underneath her on the chair, something she'd done since she was a little girl. "Mom, have you ever considered simplifying your accounts?" Her voice was casual, like she was asking about the weather. "I read that joint accounts are easier for emergencies." She took a sip of her coffee, watching me over the rim of her mug. "My friend's mother put everything in a trust for her kids," she continued. "No questions later on?" I didn't respond. She kept talking. "It's not about money, Mom. It's about clarity, about preparing for the future, about peace of mind." Brian added that he could help with paperwork if needed. He'd done it for clients. He had templates. He could make the process smooth. I looked down at my cereal. The milk had gone warm. The spoon felt heavy in my hand. What they didn't understand was that I had already planned for my future. My husband and I had set everything up years ago. Our finances were in order. What Lauren and Brian wanted wasn't clarification. It was control. That same afternoon, I called my financial advisor from my car. I didn't want to speak inside the house. I told him to set alerts on all transfers, block any changes, and flag activity from unknown IPs. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Foster?" he asked, his voice concerned. "It's a precaution, Stanley," I said. "Just in case." By the end of that week, Lauren handed me a packet of documents. She said she had gone ahead and drafted a sample transfer of authority just to get the ball rolling. Her tone was casual, like she was offering me a cookie recipe. Her eyes, though, stayed fixed on mine a beat too long. I didn't open the packet. I set it aside and asked her how the kids were doing in school. She didn't push further. But 2 days later, Brian brought it up again. This time, while we were alone in the garage, he was putting away golf clubs, and I was coming in from getting the mail. "Lauren's just trying to help, Caroline," he said, leaning against his shiny black SUV. "You're lucky to have a daughter who cares so much." Then he said with a smile too smooth, "Money only creates drama when people get secretive." I stepped around him, walked back inside, and locked my bedroom door behind me. That night, I reviewed every single account I had. I changed passwords. I wrote down names of people I trusted. I scanned and saved backup copies to a flash drive I hid inside the lining of my suitcase. I didn't sleep much. I wasn't afraid yet, but I had begun to prepare. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. And this pattern had shown itself before. I just hadn't wanted to see it until now. The third week blurred into the fourth, and with it came an eerie shift in the house. It was in the way Brian's footsteps grew louder down the hall, in how Lauren stopped knocking before entering my room, and in how the grandkids were suddenly too busy to spend time with me. Small isolations built slowly, then all at once. It began the morning I found my medicine organizer in the wrong drawer. I had placed it under my bed like always, but that day it sat on top of my dresser, open. The Tuesday slot was empty, even though I hadn't taken anything yet. I didn't panic. I didn't accuse. I just tossed the pills and started a new set from my travel stash. I began carrying my essentials in a zipped pouch that never left my side. I stopped leaving my coffee unattended. One afternoon, I overheard Brian in the backyard talking too loud into his phone. He was pacing by the shed, his voice sharp. "We're running out of time," he said, glancing toward the house. She's not as pliable as you said. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard him mention equity, consolidation, and legal guardianship. My blood ran cold. Later that day, Lauren asked if I would mind signing a few forms for her refinance. She said it was just a routine update. I looked at the papers carefully, turning each page with deliberate slowness. "Lauren, why is my name listed as co-owner of the secondary mortgage?" I asked, pointing to the line. She paused just long enough. Then she said it must have been a clerical error. I knew then I had underestimated just how far they were willing to go. That night I pulled out the manila envelope I kept hidden under the liner of my suitcase. Inside were old records from my husband's accounts, notarized copies of my trust, and a full list of my assets. Everything had been kept separate since he passed. That was always our plan. Lauren and Brian didn't know that my name had never been attached to the Iowa house. They assumed I had nothing but the condo and retirement account. But the truth was, I still had access to a diversified portfolio, some of it offshore. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't dependent. My husband had been a cautious man. "Prepare for the worst, Caroline," he'd always said. "Even from those you love." I never thought that would include our daughter. In the quiet of my room, I could almost hear my husband's voice. "Remember the farm in Ames?" he'd asked me once, when Lauren was still in college. "It's in your name, not ours. Just in case. Just in case our daughter married a man who saw me as a walking checkbook instead of a mother-in-law." Alone in my bedroom, I formulated a plan. Not a confrontation, but a quiet defense. It would take time. It would take precision. But I had both on my side. What I didn't have was the luxury of waiting. The next day, I visited the bank quietly. I asked to speak to manager-level staff. I presented my identification and initiated a full review of recent access attempts on all accounts tied to my Social Security number. The young manager, Melissa, tapped at her keyboard, then looked up with concern. "Mrs. Foster, there have been 2 failed login attempts from an IP address tied to Armstrong Consulting Group. Do you recognize this business?" I nodded slowly. "That's my son-in-law's company." She continued typing, her expression professional but troubled. "There was also an attempt to change your contact information last week. It was flagged by our system because it wasn't done through your verified devices. I asked her to set the highest security level biometric access, in-person changes, and voice-verified transactions. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and got it done." "Mrs. Foster," she said as I was leaving, "if you need additional help, we have resources for situations like this." Her eyes told me she understood more than I had said. I thanked her and left. I returned home before sunset. Dinner was already on the table. Lauren served roast pork with overcooked carrots. Brian asked how my day had been. "I went to the park," I said, cutting my meat into small pieces. "The tulips are blooming." He nodded, satisfied. Lauren's eyes flickered to mine briefly, then away. That night, I barely slept. Not from fear, but from a growing sense that something inevitable was about to crack. And it did. 3 days later, I woke to find my room ransacked. My suitcase was unzipped, my drawers pulled open. Even the lining in my coat was torn. My flash drive was gone. I stood silently in the doorway, heart pounding. Then I walked downstairs. Lauren was in the kitchen, stirring coffee with unusual focus. Brian was by the fridge, arms crossed, watching me enter. "Did someone go through my room?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Lauren didn't look up. "Maybe one of the kids went in looking for scissors." Brian shrugged. "Maybe you misplaced something." They said it too quickly, too rehearsed. I didn't respond. I went back upstairs, closed the door, and picked up the landline I had hidden behind the bookshelf. It was a burner line I kept for emergencies, something my husband and I had used years ago when dealing with a real estate scam. I dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. My lawyer's office. His assistant answered. "Harriet Wilson for Mr. Goldstein," I said, using my maiden name, our agreed-upon code. She transferred me immediately. Within minutes, my attorney confirmed he could lock down everything. I asked him to trigger the fail-safe in my trust, to remove any shared power of attorney privileges, to notify my offshore custodian that fraud had been attempted. I also want to make a preemptive report to Adult Protective Services, I added. Just to put something on record, I wasn't accusing yet, but I wanted a trace. Then I packed a small overnight bag. Only essentials. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I simply acted. That evening, as I came down the stairs, I saw Brian standing by the fireplace, holding my flash drive. He didn't say anything. He looked smug. Lauren stood behind him, her face hard to read. I'm going out for a walk, I told them. I need some fresh air. They didn't stop me. They thought they had what they wanted. At the corner of the block, I got into a black sedan waiting for me. My attorney had sent a driver. We drove straight to a safe location I had arranged years ago, a small house in Ames deeded in the name of an old college friend who owed me a favor. The next day, I froze all joint assets, placed a fraud alert, transferred everything into a protected, irrevocable trust, and for the first time in weeks, I slept, not deeply, but without looking over my shoulder. The silence in the safe house was different. It didn't echo like the big house. It wrapped around me like a warm coat. For the first time in weeks, I could hear my own breath again. I sat at the kitchen table that evening with a cup of peppermint tea, looking at the stack of documents my lawyer had sent over. Every page had a clear purpose. Every signature I made that night pulled a little piece of my life back into my hands. Over the next 3 days, I stayed in that quiet little house in Ames with the curtains drawn and the phones silenced. I didn't watch the news. I didn't scroll through anything. I thought about how it got this far. How my own daughter, whom I had raised with love and values, could turn so calculating, so cold. What I didn't understand then was Lauren's inner conflict. Later, I would learn that she had been crying in private, torn between her loyalty to me and her marriage to Brian. He had been manipulating her for years, slowly poisoning her mind against me, telling her that I had never really supported her choices, that I secretly judged her life. He had created a false reality where taking my money was somehow justified, even necessary. Lauren wasn't evil. She was lost. But in that moment, all I knew was betrayal. On the 4th morning, I received an email from the bank. There had been an attempted login using outdated credentials, then another from my lawyer. He had spoken to the trust administrator. All assets had been moved. The new structure was untouchable, irrevocable, and the successor trustees I had named long ago, 2 women from my reading group, both retired professors, were now legally in charge if anything ever happened to me. That same afternoon, I requested a call with the lead investigator at Adult Protective Services. They had already opened a quiet inquiry just as a precaution. I gave them everything, every incident, every document, every photo I had discreetly taken of the drawer after it was rifled through. I gave them a timeline down to the hour of when I began noticing the manipulation. I wasn't pressing charges, not yet, but I wanted a record. The officer I spoke with was patient and precise. She didn't offer false comfort, but she did say something I hadn't heard in a long time. She said I had done the right thing. She said I wasn't alone. Later that evening, I drove back to Lauren and Brian's house. Not to stay, just to collect some personal items I couldn't leave behind. My husband's watch, the family photo albums, my mother's recipe box. I had a key, and I knew they would be out at a school function for my grandson. I parked down the street and walked quietly to the house. The porch light was off. I inserted my key and turned it slowly. The door opened without a sound. I stepped inside, listening for any movement. The house was silent. I moved up the stairs to my old room, pulled out a canvas tote bag, and began filling it with my treasures. Family photos, my jewelry box with my mother's pearls, the handwritten letters from my husband when we were dating. These weren't valuable to anyone but me. I was just zipping the bag when I heard the front door open. Voices drifted up, Brian's commanding tone, Lauren's quieter responses. They were home early. I froze, clutching the bag to my chest. Footsteps on the stairs, heavy, determined, Brian's. "I thought I saw a light up here," he called out. Then he appeared in the doorway. His expression shifted from confusion to anger when he saw me. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded. "Getting my things," I said simply, standing my ground. Lauren appeared behind him, her eyes widening. "Mom, we thought you were... We didn't know where." "I've been safe," I said. "Safer than I was here." Brian stepped forward, his face darkening. "You think you're clever, don't you? Locking up the accounts, setting up some trust. You think that changes anything." I looked at my daughter, not at him. "Lauren, there's something you need to know. I've had a forensic accountant go through all the paperwork you've been asking me to sign. Do you know what they found?" Lauren glanced uncertainly at Brian, then back to me. "The documents would have transferred all my assets to Brian's personal accounts, not family accounts. Not to you, not to the children, just to him." I saw the moment of doubt cross her face, the first crack in Brian's carefully constructed narrative. Brian stepped between us. "She's lying. Lauren, she's old, confused. You know how she gets." That's when I pulled out the printed analysis from my bag, prepared by my attorney and the forensic accountant. I held it out to Lauren. "See for yourself." Brian lunged forward, grabbing for the papers. "This is none of your business anymore." I stepped back, but he caught my arm, twisting it painfully. Before I could react, his other hand formed a fist, and he struck me across the face. The pain exploded like a firework. I staggered backward, tasting blood. Through my daze, I heard Lauren scream, not at Brian, but at me. "Look what you made him do!" she shrieked, her face contorted with misplaced anger and fear. "Why couldn't you just help us? Why do you always have to control everything?" I steadied myself against the wall, shocked not by the blow, but by her reaction. In that moment, I saw how deep Brian's manipulation had gone. He had completely rewritten her reality. "Get out." Lauren grabbed my hair, pulling me toward the stairs. "Get out of our house." Pain shot through my scalp as she dragged me down the hallway. I tried to break free, but her grip was firm, fueled by a rage I had never seen in my daughter before. At the top of the stairs, I finally wrenched away, nearly falling. I clutched the banister, looking back at Lauren and Brian. He stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his expression triumphant. "I found the key documents in your trust," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "I know about the $3 million you were trying to get. And I know about the other families, too. The Hendersons, the Wongs. You've done this before." Brian's face shifted, the confidence faltering just slightly. "The FBI Financial Crimes Unit has everything now," I continued. "They're looking into all of Armstrong Consulting's client accounts, especially the elderly clients." Now genuine fear flashed across his face. Lauren looked confused, turning to him. "Brian, what is she talking about?" I didn't wait for his answer. I made my way down the stairs, still clutching my bag of memories. At the front door, I turned back one last time. "I never stopped loving you. Lauren, when you're ready to see the truth, I'll be there." I walked out into the cool night air, my cheek throbbing, my heart heavier than I thought possible. I got into my car and called 911 reporting the assault. Then I sat there, waiting for the police, watching the house where I had once thought I'd find family again, sitting on the curb outside their house, blood trickling from my split lip. I waited for the police to arrive. I was shivering despite the mild evening, not from cold but from shock. How had my own child become someone I no longer recognized? But as the distant sound of sirens grew closer, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Brian and Lauren thought they had won. They thought they had beaten me, humiliated me, taken everything. What they didn't know was that I had already prepared for this moment, and 1 hour later, when the police took Brian in for questioning and served him with a restraining order, everything would begin to fall apart for them. Sometimes the strongest power isn't in fighting back, it's in being 3 steps ahead. The police arrived within minutes, their red and blue lights painting the quiet suburban street in urgent colors. 2 officers approached me where I sat on the curb. One knelt beside me, a woman with kind eyes and practiced calm. "Ma'am, are you Caroline Foster?" she asked, taking in my swollen cheek and bloodied lip. I nodded, wincing at the movement. "I'm Officer Martinez. Can you tell me what happened?" I told her everything, not just about the assault, but about the financial manipulation, the documents, the theft of my flash drive. My voice remained steady, despite the throbbing pain in my face. Years of cataloging historical archives had taught me the value of precise details. "We'll need to take photos of your injuries," Officer Martinez said. "And I strongly recommend medical attention." The second officer was already at the door, Brian answering with Lauren hovering anxiously behind him. I could hear his voice, smooth and reasonable, floating down the driveway. "A misunderstanding. My mother-in-law has been confused lately. Fell and hit her face on the banister. The ambulance arrived as the officers were questioning them separately. The EMT cleaning my cut told me I'd need stitches. As they helped me onto the stretcher, I saw Brian watching from the doorway, his face a mask of concerned son-in-law. Only I could see the cold calculation behind his eyes. At the hospital, a doctor with silver-streaked hair gently stitched my lip while a social worker sat nearby, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Foster, I'm Sarah from Elder Services," she said once the doctor finished. "Would you feel comfortable telling me a bit more about your living situation?" I appreciated her directness. No patronizing questions about whether I was confused or imagining things. Just a professional woman doing her job, treating me like a person with agency. "I've been documenting everything," I told her, reaching for my purse and pulling out a small notebook. "Dates, times, conversations. I have copies of the fraudulent documents they wanted me to sign." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's unusually thorough." I managed a small smile despite my stitches. I was a historical archivist for 30 years. Documentation is second nature. What I didn't tell her was how difficult the legal process would be. In the coming days, I would learn that financial elder abuse cases are notoriously hard to prove. The burden would fall on me to demonstrate that I hadn't willingly given permission, that I was mentally competent, that the transactions weren't gifts. The system seemed designed to protect the abusers rather than the abused. After Sarah left, I called my attorney, Howard Goldstein, from the hospital room. He answered on the first ring despite the late hour. "Caroline, I just heard from the police. Are you all right?" "I've been better," I admitted. "But I'm clear-headed. What's our next step?" "I've already filed for an emergency protective order based on the assault," Howard said. "But we need to move quickly on the financial front. The attempted login at the bank gives us leverage, but Brian is likely covering his tracks as we speak." "What about the trust modifications we made? Are they secure?" "Yes, but he'll challenge them. He'll claim you weren't of sound mind when you made the changes. We need to get you evaluated by a geriatric psychiatrist immediately to establish your cognitive capacity." "I've scheduled an appointment for tomorrow morning," I sighed, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. "And what about Lauren?" "She's being manipulated too. Howard," there was a pause on the line. "One battle at a time. Caroline, right now, we need to protect you and your assets." After hanging up, I leaned back against the hospital pillows, staring at the ceiling. In my career, I'd preserved the stories of hundreds of families through their letters, photographs, and diaries. I'd documented their triumphs and tragedies, their loves and losses, but I never imagined I'd be preserving evidence against my own daughter. The next morning, the geriatric psychiatrist, Dr. Patel, conducted a thorough evaluation. She administered cognitive tests, asked about my medical history, and observed my decision-making processes. Her conclusion was unequivocal. I was fully competent, showing no signs of cognitive impairment. "Mrs. Foster exhibits exceptional recall and executive function," she wrote in her report. "Her reasoning abilities are intact, and she demonstrates clear understanding of her financial and legal matters." Armed with this evaluation, Howard began building our case, but the legal proceedings would take time. In the meantime, I needed somewhere safe to stay. I returned to the small house in Ames, the one deeded to my old college friend Martha. It was modest 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living room with bookshelves built by Martha's late husband. But it felt secure, a fortress against the storm. That afternoon, I received an email from my bank. There had been another attempted login to my accounts, this time with the correct password but failing the two-factor authentication. The IP address matched Brian's business again. I forwarded it to Howard, who added it to our growing file of evidence. Then I called the bank's fraud department directly. "This is Caroline Foster," I said when the representative answered. "Account number 8742133B. I need to verify recent access attempts to my accounts." The representative, after confirming my identity through security questions, pulled up the activity log. "Mrs. Foster, we've flagged multiple unauthorized access attempts over the past 48 hours, she said. The most recent was at 11:23 this morning, from the same IP address as before. Yes, plus a new one. It appears to be a mobile device. I thought of Brian's constant phone scrolling, how he never let his device out of sight. I need the highest level of security possible, I said. No changes without in-person verification and my government ID. We've already implemented those protocols based on your previous request, she assured me. Your accounts are secure. What I didn't know then was that Brian had already contacted another bank where I held investments, claiming to be acting as my financial advisor. Fortunately, they too had security protocols that prevented him from gaining access. But his persistence showed how determined he was to get his hands on my money. Back at Martha's house, I began cataloging my assets systematically. My late husband Thomas had been meticulous about our finances, insisting on diversification and security. Besides our retirement accounts and the condo I'd been living in before moving to Lawrence, we owned a small commercial property in downtown Des Moines, leased to a bookstore, and had investments in several municipal bonds and a diversified stock portfolio. The most significant asset, unknown to Lauren and Brian, was the farmland outside Ames' 60 acres of prime Iowa soil that had been in Thomas's family for generations. He had transferred it solely to my name a year before his death, sensing even then that our daughter's husband might one day pose a threat to our legacy. Land endures, Caroline, Thomas had told me. When everything else fails, the land remains. The farm was now worth nearly $3 million, the exact amount Brian had been trying to extract from me. It couldn't be a coincidence. Somehow he had discovered the property's existence and value. As I reviewed the documents, I found a clause in the trust Thomas and I had established years ago. If any beneficiary contested the trust or attempted to circumvent its provisions, they would be automatically disinherited. It was a standard no-contest clause. But now it took on new significance. If Lauren pursued this course with Brian, she would lose everything her father had intended for her. The realization made my heart ache. How had it come to this? My own daughter risking her inheritance by trying to steal it before her time. I spent the evening writing everything down, not for the lawyers this time, but for myself. The facts, yes, but also the feelings, the betrayal, the hurt, the moments when I'd seen the truth in Lauren's eyes but had chosen to ignore it, the red flags I'd dismissed because I wanted so badly to believe in family. The next day, I called Howard again. "I want to add something to the trust," I said, "a rehabilitation provision." "What do you have in mind?" he asked. "If Lauren separates from Brian and undergoes financial counseling, the no-contest provision would be waived. She would be reinstated as a beneficiary." There was a pause. "You're giving her away back," Howard said softly. "She's still my daughter," I replied. "Somewhere under Brian's influence, she's still the girl who used to help me plant tulips every fall." Howard agreed to draft the provision. Meanwhile, I needed to retrieve more of my personal belongings from Lauren's house. The police had advised me not to return alone, so I arranged for an officer to accompany me the following morning during a time when I knew Brian would be at work. Officer Martinez met me outside the house at 10 a.m. Lauren's car was in the driveway. She hadn't gone to her part-time job at the community college. My stomach tightened as we approached the door. Lauren answered after the second knock, her eyes widening at the sight of the uniformed officer beside me. Her gaze shifted to my bruised face, then quickly away. "Mrs. Armstrong," Officer Martinez said formally, "your mother is here to collect her personal belongings as permitted by the emergency protective order. Will be approximately 30 minutes. Lauren stepped back wordlessly, allowing us inside. The house felt different now, hostile territory rather than home. I moved efficiently, gathering clothes, books, and personal items while Officer Martinez remained in the hallway, maintaining a clear line of sight. As I packed my reading glasses and medication from the bathroom, I heard Lauren's voice, low and strained, asking the officer questions. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was defensive, justifying. In the bedroom, I found my ceramic owl salt shakers wrapped carefully in tissue at the back of a drawer. I'd brought them as a small touch of home, never imagining I'd be packing them again so soon. As I placed them in my bag, I heard footsteps approaching. Lauren stood in the doorway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Without the officer directly beside her, her posture changed less defiant, more uncertain. "You're really doing this," she said. It wasn't a question. I continued packing. "You left me no choice. Lauren, we were trying to help you," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're getting older." We wanted to make sure everything was taken care of. I looked up at her then, really looked at her. Behind the defensiveness, I saw fear, not just fear of consequences, but deeper anxiety. Brian had convinced her that this was necessary, perhaps even righteous. "Is that what Brian told you?" I asked quietly. "That taking control of my assets was for my benefit?" Her eyes darted away. "You don't understand our situation. The business is struggling, the kids' college funds." "So it was about the money," she said, the confirmation landing like a stone in my chest. "It was about family," she countered, a flash of anger returning. "Something you've never prioritized. You were always working, always at your precious library while Dad raised me." The accusation stunned me. Is that how she remembered her childhood, the sacrifices we'd made to give her opportunities? The careful balance we'd maintained. "Your father and I worked hard to provide for you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Everything we did was for your future. And now you're using that same money to punish me," she said bitterly. "No, Lauren, I'm protecting what your father and I built from someone who sees it as a solution to his financial problems." Her face flushed. "Brian loves me. He's looking out for our family." "Then why were the transfer documents in his name only?" I asked. "Why wasn't your name on any of the accounts he was trying to create?" Doubt flickered across her face, the same doubt I'd seen the night of the assault, but she pushed it away, retreating behind the narrative Brian had constructed. "You've always been controlling," she said. "You never thought anyone was good enough for me." Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here, Mrs. Foster?" I nodded, zipping my bag closed. "I'm finished." As I moved toward the door, Lauren's hand shot out, grabbing my arm, not roughly but urgently. "Mom," she said, her voice suddenly small, like the child who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. What's going to happen now? For a moment, I saw my real daughter, not Brian's puppet, but the woman I'd raised. Scared, confused, caught between loyalties. "That depends on you," I said gently. "There's still a way back from this, Lauren, but you have to see what's happening." Her hand fell away. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the hard shell of defensiveness. "You should go," she said, turning away. As Officer Martinez escorted me to my car, I glanced back at the house. Lauren stood in the window watching, her expression unreadable. I raised my hand in a small wave, but she let the curtain fall, disappearing from view. The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations and document filings. Howard worked tirelessly, securing court orders to protect my assets while the investigation proceeded. But Brian was fighting back, hiring an expensive attorney from Des Moines who specialized in contesting trusts. "He's claiming you've been manipulated by outside parties who want access to your money," Howard told me during a strategy session at his office. "Specifically, he's named me and your friend Martha as co-conspirators who've isolated you from your family." I couldn't help but laugh, despite the seriousness of the situation. "Martha has been in Arizona caring for her sister for the past 3 months. She doesn't even know about any of this." Howard didn't smile. "It's a common tactic in these cases. They're trying to portray you as a victim, just not their victim. They'll argue that we've convinced you your family is abusive to gain control of your assets." "But we have documentation," I protested. The bank access attempts, the falsified transfer papers, the physical assault. And they'll have explanations for all of it, Howard countered. The bank attempts were routine financial planning. The transfer papers were drafts for your consideration. The assault was self-defense when you became agitated. The injustice of it burned in my chest. So they can just lie and get away with it. Howard leaned forward, his expression serious. No, Caroline, they won't get away with it. But fighting them requires strategy, patience, and absolutely impeccable documentation, which, fortunately, you've provided. He pulled out a thick folder copies of all the records I'd kept, enhanced by his legal team's research. We've discovered something interesting about Brian Armstrong, he said, opening the folder. This isn't his first attempt at financial manipulation. He slid a document across the desk, a complaint filed 3 years earlier by an elderly client of Armstrong Consulting, alleging that Brian had redirected investment funds into his personal accounts. The case had been settled quietly, with a non-disclosure agreement. There are 2 more like this, Howard continued. All settled, all hushed up, but they establish a pattern. I stared at the paperwork, a cold clarity washing over me. He's done this before. Yes, and he's gotten away with it. Until now. As I drove back to Martha's house, my mind raced with this new information. Had Lauren known about these other cases? Was she complicit, or another victim of Brian's manipulation? When I arrived, a police car was parked outside. My heart jumped. Had something happened? Had Brian somehow found where I was staying? Officer Martinez stepped out as I approached, her expression reassuring. Nothing to worry about, Mrs. Foster. Just following up on some information that came in regarding your case. She explained that another complaint had been filed against Brian Armstrong that morning, this one from his former business partner, alleging financial impropriety and fraud. When cases like yours become public, it often encourages others to come forward, she said. People who might have been afraid to speak up before. Inside the house, I made tea while Officer Martinez reviewed new security measures with me, changing my routine, varying my driving routes, installing a simple security system that Martha had agreed to over the phone from Arizona. We don't anticipate any physical danger, she assured me. Mr. Armstrong has no history of violence outside of the incident with you, but financial abusers can become unpredictable when their schemes collapse. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table, turning my wedding ring around my finger, a habit from 40 years of marriage that I'd never broken. Thomas would have known how to handle this. He'd always been the strategic one, thinking 3 moves ahead while I focused on the present. But perhaps I'd learned more from him than I realized. I'd anticipated Brian's moves, secured my assets, documented everything. I was fighting back in my own way. My phone rang an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Mrs. Foster. A woman's voice, unfamiliar. This is Rebecca Wong from First Midwest Bank's Fraud Department. We've detected some unusual activity regarding your accounts that we'd like to verify with you. My guard went up immediately. This could be legitimate, or it could be Brian attempting a new angle. I'm happy to discuss this, I said carefully, but I'll need to verify your identity first. I'll call the bank's main number myself. Of course, the woman said, sounding relieved rather than offended. That's exactly the right approach. I'll be at extension 4727. I hung up, found the bank's official number online, and called. After being transferred to extension 4727, I heard the same voice. Thank you for being cautious, Mrs. Foster, Rebecca said. We're seeing an increase in sophisticated phishing attempts targeting older account holders. She explained that someone claiming to be my financial advisor had visited their branch that morning, attempting to gain information about my investment portfolio. He had business cards in a convincing manner, but lacked the proper authorization codes. Our teller followed protocol and declined to provide any information. Rebecca assured me. But we wanted to alert you that someone is actively trying to access your accounts. I thanked her for the warning and added First Midwest to the list of institutions with enhanced security on my accounts. Then I called Howard to update him. This is good for our case, he said after I explained. It shows ongoing attempts despite the protective order. I'll add it to the file and notify the prosecutor. That evening, I received a text message from an unfamiliar number. Mom, it's Lauren. Brian took my phone. We need to talk, please. I stared at the message, suspicion and hope warring within me. Was this really Lauren reaching out? Or was it Brian, trying to locate me or gather evidence to use against me? I showed the message to Howard via a secure email he'd set up for me. Don't respond yet, he advised. We need to verify it's actually Lauren. I'll have my assistant call her workplace tomorrow to see if she's been in, if she seems distressed. Anything unusual. I barely slept that night, the message playing over and over in my mind. The next morning, Howard called with news. My assistant spoke with Lauren's supervisor at the community college, he said. Lauren hasn't been to work all week. Her supervisor said she called in Monday, sounding upset, saying she had a family emergency. My concern deepened. Do you think she's in danger? It's hard to say, Howard admitted. But we need to proceed cautiously. I've arranged for a licensed investigator to do a welfare check, posing as a delivery person. She'll report back this afternoon. The hours crawled by as I waited for news. I tried to distract myself by organizing my documents, creating a timeline of events that Howard could use in court. But my mind kept returning to Lauren, to the uncertainty in her eyes when I'd collected my belongings, to the brief moment when her defenses had dropped. Finally, around 4 p.m., Howard called back. The investigator made contact, he reported. Lauren answered the door, appeared physically unharmed but emotionally distressed. Brian's car wasn't in the driveway, and she was alone except for the children. The investigator observed security cameras recently installed around the property. So she's being watched, I said, the implications sinking in. It appears so, Howard agreed. But there's more. While at the door, Lauren whispered to the investigator, asking if she had been sent by you. When the investigator hesitated, Lauren slipped her a note before closing the door. My heart raced. What did it say? Just 5 words. Tell my mother I'm sorry. The simple message cracked something open inside me, grief and hope intermingled. Lauren was reaching out. Somehow, something had shifted. What do we do now? I asked. We need to establish a secure way to communicate with her, Howard said. And we need to move quickly before Brian realizes she's having doubts. We devised a plan. Howard would send a package to Lauren containing documents she needed to sign regarding her father's trust, a legitimate reason for contact that wouldn't arouse Brian's suspicion. Hidden within the paperwork would be a prepaid phone and instructions for secure communication. The package was delivered the next day. That evening, as I sat reading in Martha's living room, the burner phone I'd been given rang. Mom, Lauren's voice was hushed, urgent. Are you okay? I saw what he did to your face. The police came and... I'm fine, I assured her, relief washing over me at the sound of her voice, her real voice, not the defensive mask she'd worn at the house. Where's Brian now? At a client dinner. The kids are asleep. I only have a few minutes. Her words tumbled out rapidly. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what he was planning. He told me we were just consolidating accounts to help you manage things as you got older. But then I found documents on his computer transfers to offshore accounts, power of attorney forms with just his signature. Why didn't you come to me? I asked, trying to keep accusation from my tone. She was quiet for a moment. I was scared, she finally admitted. He's different at home than what people see. When I questioned him about the documents, he got so angry. He said if I didn't help convince you, we'd lose everything. The house, the kids' college funds. He said it was your fault for being selfish. My heart sank at this manipulation Lauren had endured. Have you thought about leaving? I asked carefully. Where would I go? Her voice cracked. He controls all our accounts. I don't even have access to my own paycheck anymore. And the kids... Lauren, listen to me, I said firmly. There are resources, people who can help. You're not trapped. You don't understand, she whispered. He has everything monitored, my phone, my computer, even the house. These cameras aren't for security. They're to watch me. The control Brian exerted was even more extensive than I'd feared. Lauren, I have to go, she cut in suddenly. His car just pulled in. I'll try to call again when I can. The line went dead. I sat in the silence of Martha's living room, the implications of what I'd learned settling over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about my money anymore. My daughter was living under surveillance, isolated and afraid. I called Howard immediately, relaying everything Lauren had told me. "This changes things," he said grimly. "We're not just looking at financial abuse now, but domestic control and emotional abuse. I'll contact the prosecutor first thing tomorrow. We may be able to expand the protective order to include Lauren and the children." "She's afraid to leave," I said. "He's convinced her she has nowhere to go." "That's typical in these situations," Howard replied. "Abusers isolate their victims, make them dependent, but we can help her see options." The next morning, I woke to pounding on the front door. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Brian stood on the porch, his face contorted with rage. "I know you're in there. Caroline," he shouted, pounding again. "Open the door. I know Lauren called you." My blood ran cold. How had he found me? And what had he done to Lauren? I didn't open the door. Instead, I retreated to the kitchen and called 911, keeping my voice low. "There's a man at my door violating a protective order," I said to the dispatcher. "He's becoming violent." As I waited for the police, Brian's shouting grew louder, more threatening. "You've ruined everything," he yelled through the door. "Years of planning, all destroyed because you couldn't just sign the papers like a good mother-in-law." I heard glass shatter. He'd broken a window. Terrified, I retreated to the bathroom, locking the door and clutching the phone as the dispatcher assured me officers were minutes away. Brian's footsteps thumped through the house, getting closer. "Where are you?" "Caroline." His voice was eerily calm now. "We need to talk about Lauren, about how you've poisoned her against me." The bathroom doorknob rattled. I pressed myself against the far wall, heart hammering. "She told me everything," he said through the door. "How you've been planning this for months. How you never intended to help us, even after all we did for you." It was all lies. Of course, a twisted version of reality where I was the manipulator, not him. But what had he done to Lauren to make her say these things? Or was he bluffing, trying to drive a wedge between us? The distant wail of sirens grew louder. Brian cursed. "This isn't over." He spat through the door. "You've taken my wife, my children, my reputation. I won't let you take everything else too." His footsteps receded rapidly. By the time the police arrived, he was gone, leaving behind a broken window and a house in disarray. As Officer Martinez took my statement, her radio crackled with an update. Brian Armstrong had been apprehended 3 blocks away, attempting to flee in his vehicle. "Mrs. Foster," Officer Martinez said, her expression grave. "We need to check on your daughter immediately. If Mr. Armstrong came here in this state—" I didn't need her to finish the thought. While another officer secured the scene, Martinez drove me to Lauren's house, lights flashing but siren silent. As we pulled up, I saw Lauren sitting on the front steps, a small suitcase beside her. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen. I was out of the car before it fully stopped. Rushing to my daughter, she looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Mom," she whispered, falling into my arms as I reached her. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." As I held her, feeling her body shake with sobs against mine. I knew we had a long road ahead. But in that moment, on those steps, something broken began to heal. My daughter had found her way back to me, emerging from Brian's shadow into the light of truth, and I would do whatever it took to help her rebuild. The day after Brian's arrest, I sat with Lauren in Howard's office, the gravity of our situation settling around us like heavy fog. Lauren's bruised face told a story that no legal document could fully capture the culmination of years of manipulation and control that had finally erupted into physical violence when his scheme collapsed. "Let me get this straight," Howard said, glancing up from his yellow legal pad. After Lauren received our package and called Caroline, Brian checked her phone records. Lauren nodded, wincing as the movement aggravated her injuries. "He has monitoring software on everything: my phone, my laptop, even the house phones. When I came back upstairs after calling Mom, he was waiting for me, holding up his tablet with the call log displayed." "And that's when he assaulted you?" Howard asked gently. Lauren's eyes dropped to her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. He didn't hit me at first. He just screamed, asked what I'd told her, if I'd ruined everything. When I wouldn't answer, he grabbed my shoulders, shook me. Then she touched her swollen eye. Then he lost control. I reached over, covering her trembling hands with mine. She didn't pull away. "What about the children?" I asked, my heart aching for my grandchildren. "They were asleep. I made sure they didn't see anything." Lauren's voice broke. "When he left, stormed out to find you, I packed a bag, got the kids ready. I was going to call a cab when the police arrived." Howard made a few more notes, then set down his pen. "Lauren, I need to be clear about something. What you're describing, the monitoring, isolation, financial control, and now physical violence constitutes domestic abuse. Combined with the financial exploitation targeting your mother, we're looking at multiple serious charges against Brian." Lauren nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know. I should have seen it sooner. Should have stopped it." "Victims rarely see it coming," Howard said kindly. "Abusers like Brian are skilled manipulators. They build their control gradually, making each step seem reasonable until you're trapped." "I believed him," Lauren whispered. "When he said Mom was becoming forgetful, that she needed our help managing her finances, I believed him because I wanted to, because it was easier than admitting the truth about the man I married." I squeezed her hand. "You're seeing it now. That's what matters." Howard outlined our next steps. Lauren would file for an emergency protective order covering herself and the children. We would pursue criminal charges for both the financial exploitation and the physical assaults. Given Brian's flight attempt, the prosecutor would likely request he be held without bail. "What about divorce?" Lauren asked, her voice small but determined. "One step at a time," Howard advised. "Let's secure your safety and financial independence first. I've contacted a colleague who specializes in domestic violence cases. She'll help navigate the divorce when you're ready." As we left Howard's office, Lauren paused in the hallway. "Mom, where will we go, the kids and I? We can't go back to that house." "You'll stay with me," I said without hesitation. "At Martha's place. There's room for all of us." Lauren's relief was palpable. "Are you sure after everything I've done?" "You're my daughter," I said simply. "And those children are my grandchildren. We're family, real family, not the twisted version Brian created." That afternoon, we collected the children from the temporary care of Lauren's friend Susan. 9-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Jake were confused and frightened, aware that something serious had happened, but unsure what it meant. Lauren explained in age-appropriate terms Daddy had done something wrong and needed to face consequences. For now, they would be staying with Grandma. As we settled into Martha's house, I watched Lauren with her children patient despite her exhaustion, answering their questions honestly but gently. In those interactions, I saw the daughter I'd raised, not Brian's puppet. She had found her way back to herself. That evening, after the children were asleep, Lauren and I sat at the kitchen table with mugs of chamomile tea. The bruises on her face were darkening, a visible reminder of what we'd escaped. "I keep thinking about when it started," she said, staring into her mug. "Not the abuse, I can see that now, how he isolated me from friends, controlled our finances, checked my phone, but when did he start targeting you and your money?" I considered the question. "I think it began after your father died. Brian started asking more questions about the estate, the trust arrangements. He was fishing for information about assets." Lauren nodded slowly. 3 years ago, he wanted to start his own investment firm. He needed capital but got turned down for loans. That's when he started talking about helping you with your finances. "And the farmland, how did he find out about that?" "He hired a private investigator," Lauren admitted, shame coloring her voice. "Said it was to make sure you were safe living alone. The PI discovered the property deed in your name." The calculated nature of Brian's scheme chilled me. 3 years of planning, of building a narrative about my declining competence, of positioning himself to seize control of everything Thomas and I had built. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Lauren whispered. "I should have protected you. We should have protected each other," I corrected gently. "That's what we'll do now." The next day brought a flurry of legal proceedings. Brian was formally charged with domestic assault, violation of a protective order, attempted financial exploitation of an elder, and breaking and entering. The judge denied bail, citing his flight risk and the seriousness of the charges. But our legal battles were just beginning. As Howard had predicted, Brian's expensive attorney filed motions challenging everything the validity of my trust modifications. Lauren's testimony, even my mental competence despite Dr. Patel's evaluation. He's trying to drag this out, Howard explained during our weekly update meeting. Wear us down, deplete resources, hope we'll settle for less, just to end it. He doesn't know who he's dealing with, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. I cataloged and preserved historical documents for 3 decades. I know how to play the long game, Howard smiled. That's the spirit. And there's good news, the FBI has taken an interest in the case. My eyebrows rose. The FBI, financial crimes against elders have become a priority for them, especially cases involving multiple victims. Brian's previous settlements with other clients raised red flags. They're investigating whether his entire business was essentially a front for defrauding vulnerable clients. This development changed everything. Within days, FBI agents interviewed me about my experiences with Brian, particularly interested in the documents he had tried to get me to sign. They also spoke with Lauren about what she had witnessed in the business. He had a list, she told them. Potential clients, all elderly, all with significant assets. He called them transitions, people transitioning into retirement who needed help managing their finances. As the investigation expanded, more victims came forward. 3 former clients described similar patterns, Brian gaining their trust, gradually taking control of their finances, then diverting funds into his own accounts. The amounts were smaller than what he'd attempted with me, but the pattern was identical. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding life with Lauren and the children. Emma and Jake were resilient, adjusting to life at Martha's house with the adaptability of youth. We established routine school, homework, family dinners. I read to them every night, the same stories I'd once read to Lauren. Lauren began therapy, working through the years of manipulation and control. Some days were harder than others. She would swing between anger and grief, between determination and doubt. I gave her space when she needed it, support when she asked. One evening, about a month after moving in, Lauren found me sorting through old photographs in the living room. "What are you doing?" she asked, settling beside me on the sofa. "Creating a timeline," I explained, showing her the albums I'd organized chronologically. Not for the lawyers this time, for us, to remember who we were before Brian, who we can be again. Lauren picked up a photo herself at 12, proudly holding a science fair ribbon. "I'd forgotten about this," she said softly. "First place for my project on agricultural soil erosion. Dad helped me build the display." "You worked on it for weeks," I recalled. "So determined to get every detail right." "Like you," she said, looking up at me. "Dad always said I got my meticulousness from you." We spent hours going through the albums, rediscovering our shared history. The camping trips Thomas had insisted on, despite our mutual dislike of tents. Lauren's high school graduation. The day she got her acceptance letter to Iowa State. "You know what I remember most about that day?" Lauren asked, touching the photo of her younger self, ecstatic with her college acceptance. "You canceled your evening archive meeting to take me out for dinner. Just the 2 of us." "Of course I did," I said. "It was important." "But your work was important too," she insisted. "You never made me feel like I came second, but I knew your career mattered to you. That's why it hurt so much when Brian said—" She stopped abruptly. "When Brian said what?" I prompted gently. Lauren hesitated. "He told me you resented having a child, that you would have had a more prestigious career if you hadn't been tied down with me. That's why you worked so much to escape." The cruel lie took my breath away. "Lauren, no, never. Your father and I wanted you more than anything. My work at the library was meaningful to me. Yes, but you were my greatest joy." "I know that now," she said. "But he was so convincing. He would twist things, use small truths to sell big lies until I couldn't tell what was real anymore." That night, I added another provision to the rehabilitation clause in my trust. If Lauren completed her therapy program and financial independence training, she would not only be reinstated as a beneficiary, she would be named co-trustee alongside me, with full transparency into all assets and decisions. It wasn't just about the money. It was about restoring what Brian had stolen from us trust. 3 months after Brian's arrest, we received notice of a probate court filing. Brian's attorney had petitioned for a formal hearing to declare me unfit to manage my estate, claiming I was mentally compromised and being isolated by outside parties for financial gain. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so cruel. I told Howard during our emergency meeting. Howard wasn't smiling. This is a desperate move, but potentially dangerous. Brian's attorney is claiming that your recent trust modifications were made under duress and that Lauren's testimony is coerced. That's absurd, Lauren protested. I have documentation of Brian's abuse photos, text messages, even videos from his own surveillance system, and we'll present all of that, Howard assured her. But prepare yourselves, this will get ugly. They're going to attack your credibility, Caroline's mental state, our motives. It's a scorched earth tactic. He was right. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Brian's legal team subpoenaed my medical records, demanded additional cognitive evaluations, and attempted to depose everyone from my former library colleagues to Martha's neighbors. They're fishing, Howard explained, looking for anyone who might support their narrative that you've changed dramatically in recent months or that you've expressed confusion about financial matters. I refuse to be intimidated. They won't find it because it doesn't exist. I've been managing my own finances since Thomas died 10 years ago, without a single missed payment or poor investment decision. Meanwhile, the FBI investigation continued expanding. Agents discovered offshore accounts in Brian's name containing funds traced back to at least 5 elderly clients. They also found a recently purchased property in Costa Rica, likely his planned escape route had he not been apprehended. He never planned to grow old with me, Lauren said when we learned of the Costa Rica house. I was just part of his scheme. A way to access vulnerable people like you. The revelation was painful but clarifying. Lauren filed for divorce, citing domestic abuse and criminal activity. Given the pending criminal charges, the divorce proceedings were expedited, with temporary orders freezing all marital assets until the criminal cases concluded. As the probate hearing approached, Howard prepared me extensively. They'll try to provoke you, he warned. Make you appear emotional, irrational. Remember, the judge needs to see you as composed and fully competent. I spent decades handling fragile historical documents worth millions, I reminded him. I know how to remain calm under pressure. On the morning of the hearing, I wore a navy suit I hadn't touched since Thomas's funeral. I brushed my hair smooth and pinned it back. I carried no bag, only a folder with my name on it and a heart that had learned not to shake. The courtroom was colder than it looked. I sat beside Howard, Lauren on my other side. Brian was at the defense table, dressed in an orange jumpsuit his bail still denied due to the FBI charges. He looked smaller somehow, less intimidating without his tailored suits and practiced smile. His attorney spoke first, painting me as disconnected, volatile, prey to manipulation. He used words like isolated, withdrawn, emotionally unstable. Then he introduced their witnesses, 2 of Brian's business associates who claimed they'd observed me appearing confused at social gatherings. On cross-examination, Howard methodically dismantled their testimony. One witness admitted he'd only met me twice at company events. The other revealed that Brian had offered to forgive a substantial business loan in exchange for his testimony. Then came our turn. Howard introduced Dr. Patel's evaluations, statements from my former colleagues and friends, and the detailed timeline of Brian's manipulation attempts. He walked through the pattern of control and coercion, then placed the letter I'd written on the record. At Howard's suggestion, I had written directly to the court, not as a legal pleading, but as a personal statement. 4 pages, detailing my life, my relationship with Lauren, the moment I realized she had changed, and the painful journey back to each other. The judge read it silently at the bench. When she looked up, she said only this: "It is rare in my courtroom to see such clarity from someone being accused of incapacity." She dismissed the petition without delay, calling the filing not just unfounded but an abuse of process. She referred the matter for further review by the State Bar Association, suggesting potential sanctions against Brian's attorney for filing frivolous claims. We walked out without a word to Brian or his lawyer. There was nothing left to say. Back home, I made tea and sat on the balcony for the first time since moving to Martha's house. The sky was wide, pale gold. The air smelled like rain. Later that evening, I received an email from a small women's advocacy group. Someone at the court had passed along my letter. They asked if I would speak at an upcoming forum not about the legal case, but about resilience, about reclaiming identity, about surviving quiet betrayals. I closed the laptop, not ready yet. But the thought stayed with me because maybe healing didn't look like closure. Maybe it looked like this: a quiet place, a name restored, and a voice that had finally found its volume again. A week after the probate hearing, I received a letter from the Office of a Federal Investigator. It was addressed to me directly, not through Howard, not through any legal channel. Hand-signed, tidy font, no red tape, just a quiet sentence at the bottom. We are reopening the inquiry into Armstrong Consulting Group based on new evidence of systematic elder exploitation. My fingers didn't tremble when I set the letter down. I didn't feel fear, just a tightness in my chest that told me the past wasn't finished with me yet. The next day, I met with the investigator, a man named Agent Daniels. He looked far too young to be holding such power, but his eyes were patient. He explained that several suspicious financial transfers had been flagged in the broader investigation into elder exploitation in our county, and two names kept recurring: Brian Armstrong and his former business partner, Jason Wells. We believe Armstrong Consulting was essentially a front for identifying and targeting vulnerable seniors with significant assets, Agent Daniels explained. Based on the records we've seized, they had a three-phase approach: identify prospects through financial seminars for retirees, build trust through small legitimate services, then gradually take control of their assets. I listened, giving him what I had: not just facts, but the story behind the numbers. How Brian had slowly gained access to my digital accounts. How he had pushed me to sign over power of attorney without giving me time to think. How I had once believed this was normal, even loving. Agent Daniels leaned forward. Mrs. Foster, you're not their only victim, but you're the only one who successfully fought back with documentation. Most others either lost everything or settled quietly out of fear or embarrassment. He told me they had subpoenaed banks for voice recordings tied to wire transfers. In one of them, a man identified as my son-in-law used my full name and social security number to authorize a transfer I had never approved. The voice wasn't yours, Agent Daniels confirmed. We've run audio analysis. It appears Mr. Armstrong was using voice manipulation software to impersonate older clients. The sophisticated nature of the scheme stunned me. This wasn't opportunistic theft, it was calculated. Organized fraud targeting the vulnerable. How many victims are we talking about? I asked. Agent Daniels hesitated. We've identified 23 so far, but there could be more. Total financial impact exceeds $12 million. The number was staggering. 23 elders, many probably living on reduced means now, their retirements decimated by Brian's greed. What happens next? I asked. The U.S. Attorney's Office is preparing an indictment with multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and money laundering. Given the scope and interstate nature of the crimes, Mr. Armstrong is facing significant federal prison time. That night, I sat alone in the living room with every light off. Just the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. But I felt it, that low hum of reckoning. It didn't taste like vengeance. It tasted like gravity. 2 days later, my friend Patrice stopped by. She had been supporting us from a distance, respecting our need for privacy during the legal proceedings. Now she brought a binder thick with reports and recommendations. Remember that foundation you mentioned? She asked. The one to help elder abuse survivors rebuild financially. I've been doing some research. She had assembled a comprehensive proposal structure, funding mechanisms, partnerships with legal aid organizations and financial literacy programs. She'd even identified potential board members, retired financial advisors, elder law specialists, Abuse survivors. I thought we could call it the Thomas Foster Foundation, she suggested, to honor your husband's foresight in protecting your assets. I looked through this proposal and paused at a paragraph buried near the end, a speaker series featuring elders sharing real stories of rebuilding, quiet battles, and silent triumphs. They had penciled me in. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. But for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a purpose rising from the ashes of this betrayal, not just survival, but transformation. The week after my meeting with the FBI, Lauren received notice that her divorce proceedings could move forward separately from Brian's criminal case. It was a small victory, but significant legal acknowledgement that she was a victim, not an accomplice. I keep thinking about what comes next, she said as we walked through a nearby park, watching Emma and Jake race ahead on the path. I haven't been independent in so long. I'm not sure I remember how. You'll relearn, I assured her. Day by day. Lauren had enrolled in paralegal courses at the community college where she'd previously worked in administration. I want to understand the legal system that failed so many of Brian's victims, she explained. Maybe help others navigate it better than we did. Her transformation wasn't just professional. In therapy, she was confronting painful truths about her marriage, how Brian had systematically undermined her confidence, isolated her from friends, and rewritten her history, including her relationship with me. He would take real events and twist them, she explained one evening. Like when you missed my piano recital because of that archive emergency. He'd bring it up years later as evidence you didn't prioritize me, conveniently omitting how you arranged a special performance just for you and Dad the next day. Reclaiming her authentic memories was healing for both of us. We began intentionally reconstructing our shared history, not the version Brian had fabricated, but the complex, imperfect, loving relationship we'd actually had. Some days were harder than others. Lauren still struggled with guilt over her role in Brian's scheme, particularly regarding my assets. I should have seen through him, she would say. Should have protected you. We both missed the signs, I would remind her. But we're seeing clearly now. As federal charges mounted against Brian, we learned more about the extent of his operation. Jason Wells, his former business partner, had agreed to testify in exchange for reduced charges, revealing their systematic approach to targeting elders with significant assets but limited family support. They specifically looked for widows and widowers, Howard told us after receiving an update from the prosecutor. People who might be managing finances alone for the first time, who might welcome help from a charming financial advisor with a family-first approach. The calculated cruelty of it made my stomach turn, but it also strengthened my resolve to move forward with the foundation Patrice had proposed. These predators thrived in silence and isolation. Our strongest defense was community and shared knowledge. By late summer, the Thomas Foster Foundation had moved from concept to reality. With seed funding from my own resources and a matching grant from a national elder justice organization, we established a modest office in downtown Des Moines. Our mission was threefold financial recovery grants for elder abuse survivors, legal advocacy for victims navigating complex cases, and prevention through education and community awareness. I served as board chair, with Patrice as executive director managing daily operations. Lauren joined as our legal liaison, using her new paralegal skills to help survivors understand their options and rights. The work gave her purpose beyond being Brian Armstrong's victim or even Caroline Foster's daughter. She was becoming her own person again, defined by her contributions rather than her trauma. The first foundation event was small a workshop at the public library where I had once worked. 20 attendees, mostly seniors and social workers, gathered to discuss financial safety and warning signs of exploitation. I hadn't planned to speak personally. I was there to introduce our organization and mission. But when an elderly gentleman raised his hand and quietly admitted his son-in-law had been pressuring him about his savings, the room fell silent. I set aside my prepared remarks and told him the truth. Not everything, just enough. I told him I was 71, that I had raised a daughter I loved with everything in me, that I had watched her walk away, not in one loud moment, but in 100 quiet choices. I told him about legal resources, about setting boundaries, about trusting his instincts. But mostly I told him about waking up about the day I realized survival was not the end goal. That dignity mattered more than peace. That no inheritance, no bloodline, no shared last name could ever outrank the voice inside when we finally say enough. There were no cheers, no applause, just silence and a few tears. But that silence felt different now. Not the silence of shame, but the silence of recognition. Afterward, a woman named Eloise took my hand. She was 73. Her son had taken her home equity line and vanished. She hadn't told anyone until that night. As she spoke, her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. And I realized that this was the true legacy, not the foundation, not the courtroom victory, not even the name I had cleared. It was the simple fact that somewhere in that room, someone had breathed a little easier because I had spoken first. Brian's federal trial was scheduled for the following spring. Howard warned us it would be extensive, with multiple victims testifying, but now we had something we hadn't had before: a community of support, others who understood, who believed us without question. On a crisp fall afternoon, Emma and Jake burst through the door after school, excited about a class project requiring family history. "Grandma, can you help us make a family tree?" Emma asked, already spreading papers across the kitchen table. As I sat with my grandchildren, helping them trace our lineage back to Wales, I thought about legacy, what Brian had tried to steal, what he could never touch. Not just money or property, but the stories that connected us, the values that shaped us, the love that endured despite everything. Lauren joined us, adding names and dates she remembered from her own childhood projects. Together, we built a visual representation of our family's journey, the triumphs and tragedies, the love stories and losses, the branches that grew in unexpected directions. When we finished, Jake pointed to the tree trunk where we'd written foster family. "But what about Dad?" he asked innocently. "Where does he go?" Lauren and I exchanged glances, the question we'd been anticipating finally spoken aloud. Lauren knelt beside her son. "Dad made some bad choices that hurt our family," she said gently. "He's not living with us anymore, but he'll always be part of your story." "Like a branch that grew the wrong way," Emma suggested, wise beyond her 9 years. "Something like that," Lauren agreed. "But look at all these other strong branches, Grandma. Great-Grandpa Thomas, your great-great-grandparents from Wales. They're all part of who you are, too." That night, after the children were asleep, Lauren and I sat on the porch swing that, unlike the one at her old house, actually got used. The evening air carried the first hint of autumn crispness. "I've been thinking about the house," Lauren said quietly. "Our old house. I can't imagine going back. But we can't stay with you forever." "You can stay as long as you need," I assured her. "Martha's already extended the lease indefinitely." "I know, but—" Lauren hesitated. "The kids need stability, their own space, and honestly, so do I." I had anticipated this conversation. "What if we sold the farmland?" I suggested. "Not all of it, but enough to buy you a new place somewhere without those memories, without his surveillance cameras and control." Lauren looked surprised. "Mom, no. That land is your security, your legacy." "You and the children are my legacy," I corrected her. "The land is just dirt and trees, valuable dirt and trees, admittedly, but still just property." We discussed it for hours, weighing options, making plans. By the time we went inside, we had the outline of a new beginning, a smaller house in a family-friendly neighborhood, close enough for regular visits, but separate enough for Lauren's independence. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The bruise from Brian's assault had long since faded, but I looked different, somehow steadier, more certain. The woman looking back at me wasn't just a survivor. She was a builder, creating something new from the wreckage of betrayal. I thought about the foundation workshops scheduled for the coming months, the speaking engagements I'd finally agreed to, the grant applications we were reviewing for abuse survivors, from the ashes of what Brian had tried to destroy. Something meaningful was growing. The next morning, I woke early and took my usual walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool, the sky just beginning to lighten. As I rounded the corner near the park, I saw an elderly woman I recognized from our workshop. She was walking her small dog, enjoying the quiet morning like me. We exchanged smiles, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. No words needed to be spoken. We were both still here, still walking forward, still claiming our place in the world. By the time I returned home, Lauren was in the kitchen making coffee, the children setting the table for breakfast. Normal moments that once seemed impossible. "Good walk?" Lauren asked, handing me a steaming mug. "Yes," I said, accepting it gratefully. "A very good walk." In that simple domestic moment, I felt it not closure, which suggests an ending, but openness, the freedom to move forward without the weight of what had been stolen, the space to build something new. Brian had tried to take everything from me, my assets, my daughter, my dignity. But in fighting to protect what was mine, I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed. And in that strength, I had found something even more valuable than what I was protecting: my voice. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and tell me the city you're watching from. If you appreciated my story, you might also enjoy 2 other channel favorites, The Inheritance Switch and When My Son-in-Law Tried to Put Me in a Nursing Home.